Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank everyone for being here. We appreciate it. We call to order the Student Achievement and District Instructional Performance Committee meeting, such a long name, the SAC committee for today. And we do have a quorum. Just to call attendance, Member Weinberg here. And of course, I'm here. And then Mr. Craig is with us virtually. But we have 2 of the 3 members, so we do have a quorum. Thank you all for attending. I think just to let everybody know, we have Board Member Weinberg needs to leave at 3, and there will only be myself, so we won't have a quorum at 3. I believe we can get done by 3 o'clock, right? So we'll go ahead and get started. But I do want to remind the folks who are listening in, our public audience, if you are interested in speaking in our hearing of the public, please click on the hand icon during the first 15, 20 minutes of the meeting, and we'll make sure that we call on you when it's the appropriate time. Okay, so the first item on our agenda, I believe, Dr. Brown on testing and assessment benchmarking.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, we can't hear.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and speak. Thank you, Sister. Carolyn Jones.
You can call me Sister Jones.
That's what I'm accustomed to. I'm sorry. Let me come back to school. Thank you, Board Member Jones, and I would love to call up Ms. Kathleen Spellman, the Interim Assistant Director of Performance Accountability and Testing, to provide the information regarding testing, assessment, benchmarking, and state testing.
Thank you. Thank you for the time and for allowing me to speak. I do have a few things on here, just where we're at present day for our benchmark assessments and our state assessments. Do I need to push this to make sure that the audience?
I think they hear you.
We're good?
She's okay.
Okay, great. So starting off with our benchmark assessments, MAP, iReady, and Acadience, otherwise known as DIBELS. For all of those assessments, that spring window just closed as of last Friday, our last day of school. Results currently are being aggregated for leadership review. We were able to begin pulling that data this week. Assessment results from all these assessments are used to inform our instruction according to our accelerated learning plan. This also feeds into our Ohio State Report Card of Improving At-Risk K-3 readers component. And then the link on here as well gives us the overview of our assessments for our districts. On the continuing page, the state and national assessments, we have our OST, our Ohio State tests, and our EOCs, and of course tests. This window closed May 6th. We have all of our results are in except ELA, which is a large component. So our ELA results will be released June 20th. We are expecting a full report of those releases on June 24th for any additional tests to come in for our paper tests as well. Those we do not have in as well. Those results will be public in October via the state report card. We will present that to SAC in October or maybe November. Our 21 report card came out October 14th, so that will miss the October date for our SAC committee, so we might be pushed back to November on that. We also have our advanced placement. That national testing dates took place May 2nd through the 13th. Those will be released on July 5th. And then our OELPA, which is our Ohio English Language Proficiency Assessment testing window, was January 31st through March 25th. This is determined, who takes this test is determined by the OELP screener. These are our ELL status, determines ELL status, and if they will be administered the OELPA. Mm-hmm. The AASCD, which is the alternative assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities, testing window ended on April 15th. There are new parameters around that. There's new guidance, so I put a link in that because it is quite rigorous as far as who falls in that, and it does change who gets an alternative assessment. So there's a link provided as well for that update. Don't have results at this time or data.
Okay. Questions from board members?
I have a question.
Yes.
So in regards to the math, the iReady, and the Acadians, you stated that the results are being aggregated for leadership review. Will that be given to the board to review as well? And when do you think that would be done?
We can follow up with a memo with that update. We are currently processing that as we speak.
And with the results, are you going to be comparing that to the previous years due to with the effects of COVID and everything?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Mr. Craig, do you have any questions? Can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh. Can't hear you.
Craig and Brandon. I don't have any questions because Mary asked all the good ones.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just trying to wrap my head around timelines when things happen in sequence and not to duplicate work.
Right.
So one of the things, like, this is a lot of information and a lot of it in terms of the test. Mary probably knows a lot about it because she's a teacher. But for some of us, just knowing, and I appreciate you laying it out like this so we can see who's taking what grades and what they are.
Right.
But in what I'd like to see when you said the data is being aggregated, is there a specific time when all of this data is aggregated that you can present in one shot? Or is it going to come sort of piecemeal, a little bit at a time?
Because there's different platforms, the benchmark assessments, when we close on the last day of school, we wait for that final day to make sure the participation rate is as high as we can get it. So we make sure we're getting all of our students tested. When that is open, that's when we start crunching numbers. That's when we start pulling the data. But we are pulling for the entire district for every platform listed. So, and then taking that as well and looking at growth reports from, we have our fall, spring, and then of course our fall, winter, and spring, and comparing that to a previous year. So it is a lot of data that we're aggregating. We have quite a few people working on that. And as soon as we get it, we want to put that
to send it out.
Send it out to our leadership and then of course to the board.
Okay.
The state test falls on a different timeline. So there are, for each test, because they have different windows, they just have different timelines. Some of our data is out and available, and we have looked at that, and we don't as much aggregate the state data because it is what it is. We compare it and look at growth, compare it to our benchmarks to see if the predictions are there as well. However, with the state tests, we want to make sure we have all of it and not just give you, well, here's science, here's such, that we want to get it all together at once. So we would like to get a full picture.
That's good.
Great.
Okay.
So we're looking at more July because we're looking at state tests for that as well.
Okay.
And we have the paper tests waiting for those to come in.
Okay. I trust you and the members of your department to sort of let us know. And I would just ask that you put it on, like, of course, all the board members want to see it. And I don't proclaim to even know what the best way to do that is. But for student achievement, just put it on the agenda for whenever you think it's ready.
Okay.
And then Dr. Brown and or Shauna, well, Dr. Brown in this case, can add it to the agenda and we'll know ahead of time so we can better prepare for it. Okay, that'd be great. And then my last question is, everybody's always interested in the state report card. No, people hear all these other tests. They don't know what they are, especially the community, but the community really, really grabs onto that state report card.
Right.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that that won't be ready until October. It won't be released.
Released to the public until October.
Okay.
But for us, we are just waiting on the ELA results, which are 20th, I believe I said. Okay.
So if it's released in October and our meeting is generally the first week, it won't be ready for student achievement in the first week. Okay. So it'll be ready in November.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Just want to clarify again, just trying to make sure we keep a timeline of when these things happen. Okay. Any other questions, I think, for people? And I know with the AASCD, we had conversation at our last meeting about doing some reporting and looking at some of the data from that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you here last?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're sitting over there, I think. All right. Okay. testing window. So the testing window for that is April 15th. So it might be likely to look at some of the data because this was a specific topic.
Correct.
And so I recall, and I made notes that I can't recall off the top of my head, but I made notes that there was a possibility of looking at some of those the data pieces in student achievement sometime. Now, we don't meet in July. Our next meeting is not until August. So maybe August or September. Both of those months we have we have like 2 or 3 agenda items, so it wouldn't be too much on the agenda.
Okay.
You can get that. Okay, cool. Anything else then from Mr. Craig, Ms. Weinberg? Okay.
Ms. Jones, can I just paraphrase?
Yes.
So I'm hearing you say that for the report card data, that would be a November presentation. And then for the AASCD presentation, that will be either an August or September presentation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for the information. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, Ms. Brooks for kindergarten readiness. You can come up here if you want.
Bob, are you pulling? So thank you. My team and I put together a kind of an overview picture of where we're at and where we are planning on heading. So next slide, please. So our mission is always to provide a high quality learning experience for our preschool students as they become lifelong learners. We want our children beginning with us at age 3 to remain with us all the way through graduation. So where do we begin? By access, having quality access to our families throughout our city. So next slide, please. So I have included in the presentation a map of where all of our preschool sites are located and where you can find us and hopefully enroll a child today. Next slide, please. So the overall growth of our preschools, we are currently next year going to be at 44 sites, 135 classrooms. We're providing all of this continuum of services such as a typical classroom, preschool disabilities, Montessori, or any other magnet program, a full and half day. We are very pleased that we will be adding next year a preschool at Covedale. And we also will be not adding, but transitioning in collaboration with Student Services, a co-teach classroom at Gamble, Rising Stars at Gamble. So then we will be filling in our continuum of services. At the end of the year, during 2021, because I wanted to compare coming out of our COVID year to where we are now, because during 2021, we could only enroll 1,500 students based on COVID. We ended the year at 1,413 students. This year, we ended on the last day of school in Power School. There was 1,926 students. So out of that, we looked at the number of children that we did returning child packets with that will be returning to CPS preschools. In 2021, we had 486 children returned. Maybe they were a 3-year-old returning back as a 4-year-old. This year, we have 797 students returning back to us next year from age 3 to 4. And then we looked at, because we do assist families with transitioning from a preschool into our kindergarten classrooms. In 2021, we had 925 students roll up from being a P4 to kindergarten. And this year, we're happy to say that we have ready to be rolled over into Power School, 1,129 4-year-olds going to kindergarten next year in CPS. So we wanted to look at the academics. So the alignment to kindergarten. Next slide, please. So first of all, our curriculum and everything that we plan and look at and do is directly supports the Ohio Learning and Development Standards. So that includes everything you see listed. Our preschool curriculums that do align with the kindergarten curriculum are Teaching Strategies, Creative Curriculum, the PAS program, and then we do have supplemental curriculums. Heggerty, we will be adding pre-Heggerty because we have seen a gap in phonological awareness through COVID. So we are creating now professional development for our staff that they're not just going to be doing pre or Heggerty, which is a daily lessons in phonological awareness, but that they'll know how to use the tools to meet the needs of the individual child. And then in our schools that have STEM programs, we piloted and we are going to expand next year STEM scopes. So this is our early learning assessment, and I know you hear ELA, but for us, it is this book. It is our assessment tool. So this is our 2021, our fall 21 to our spring 22 data. Understanding that our spring 2022 data is preliminary. So it is the raw data. But in each of the areas of our assessment, you can see that our staff did a beautiful job. Blue is in the fall, red is in the spring. And it can show growth across. Now, these are children that in the ELA, you can either score an A, B, C, D, which is like preschool, or you can score a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A 1 being starting on track at preschool, a 3 being that you're on track for kindergarten, and a 5 being at the end of kindergarten. So our first slide is showing any child that scored above, in other words, in the 1 through 5 range. So we did show growth with working with our staff this year on focus on language and literacy, social emotional learning, and in the area of mathematics while supporting through science and social studies. Our next slide, once again, the spring data is preliminary, is our data for any child that scored a 3, 4, or 5. So these are our children that are on track for kindergarten next year. So where we did see, and we would like to make a little more gain, is adding, deleting, and substituting sounds. We did see a loss in that through COVID, whether it was through teaching distance learning or just we were wearing masks. So we are working a lot on helping our children learn those specific skills. Any questions on the data? So then we always have to include our health and our social and emotional learning. So in preschool, we are looking at, and we have our assistant school community coordinators that work through our hubs. They do help with our registration and enrollment, but more importantly, they help our families with finding locations to do their vision, hearing, blood pressure, heights, weights, access to our health centers, our dental centers. We have the snack program for children to do healthy eating and healthy choices and learning how to engage while they're eating. Also, the social emotional learning, our social workers work with our families, our teachers, and our children through the PAS program. Along with the creation, they went out this year and we saw a great need to create calming spaces in our school buildings and at our sites. We just continue to have continuous support in this area. So collaborating with Together for All our students, you can see our list of partners. We're very excited, and this list of partners have been ongoing, and they've been building every year. What's been really exciting is this year we've been working with Leading Men's Fellowship, that they will be in 15 of our classrooms next year. So we will have 15 fellows that will be working in a classroom 5 days a week, all year long, on language and literacy. So we're here to support. So at school sites, we listed a few things that we do. We do staff professional development, compliance trainings, coaching staff up, and align our supports to what the school building is doing, because we know every school has a different focus. So we really try to include all of our trainings and all of our supports that they can have what they need to make that focus continue. And then for the community, we have monthly family engagement meetings, learning materials, and our ASCCs are always there to help support our families in anything they may need in the classroom. And any questions?
Questions from board members?
I have two questions. You stated on the slide about what preschool receives. Mission to Move, is that a organization that provides physical activity or just mindfulness?
They do mindfulness and physical activity.
So they are providing programming in terms of for
Oh,
the
yes.
kids.
And they provide not only in the classroom, in the building with the children, working collaboratively with the teachers, but they provide online services too. So a teacher at any time can pull up an activity, or they can make a request to Mission to Move to come out and do added materials.
That actually answered my other question, so thank you.
Mr. Craig, do you have any questions?
I just have one, and I want to say I appreciate you providing the early learning assessments, the graphs. I think those are really helpful for us to kind of see the track as we go forward. I guess maybe the next thought in my head is just what do we do with that information to ensure that we're consistently improving? And so I don't know if you have any, how are we using that data? I guess is one of my questions there, is my question.
Yes, an excellent question. We use the data as a team to look at and see where our gaps are, or where we are making growth or not enough growth, not only as a district, but also we drill it down to the actual school sites in the classrooms. Then we work with the principals for the principals to work with their staff. We also use it that we can see it by individual teachers for their classrooms or groups of children, that we do not go in to do evaluations, but we go in to coach. And we ask the teacher, what is your goal? What do you want to improve? What will help you improve with your children? And then our lead teachers and managers go out and actually work with that staff, with the staff on that area. We're very pleased that we are getting a curriculum council, will be occurring again next year. So we have already started to collaborate with them to get the teachers' input of how can we support, what are the needs to help fill these gaps of what is appearing in the data.
Great.
Mhm.
Anything else, Mr. Craig?
That's all I got.
Okay. Mr. Lindy, by the way, thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks, Chair Jones. I love preschool. I'm so excited to see this report. Thank you very, very much. I think the enrollment increases seem really exciting. One of the things I'm often trying to figure out in the preschool context, I know sometimes it's tricky, is to figure out of the new kids we're enrolling, are those families who didn't used to have kids in preschool? Are they families who used to be in community providers but who are switching over to CPS? And then are the demographics of the families, are they low-income families? I'm trying to figure out, are we reaching more low-income kids in the city, or just moving the kids around?
Kind of all of the above.
Okay.
First of all, this year we were very pleased, and I have to give a credit to the hubs and my team. They went out and we were able to have families, maybe they did not have their 3-year-old come because of COVID, but they enrolled at age 4. We have families that their children just turned 3 that enrolled with us right away. We enroll all year long. We did have a few families that were at childcare private providers, but they did not make it through COVID, the actual center. So they came to us. Also a big interest, like this year, performing arts. The principal agreed to partner with us for Ezra Charles, Rising Stars Ezra Charles. So now we're a feeder into the performing arts, and that helped get the word out. And now we have wonderful families down at Ezra Charles that know their kindergarten, they will be going to performing arts. So we've been very creative. So it's kind of all of the above. Our demographics are still very diverse economically in all areas. And when we're finding, other than our satellite buildings, when families are starting in the preschool, the building that they are going to, they're staying. They're choosing to stay, and they're choosing to stay at the neighborhoods.
That's great. I just, again, gratitude, deep appreciation. I think I was so encouraged with when the last presentation I remember from Shara was look at the academic impact
Yes.
and look at how it's even bigger in low-income families, and that just feels great. My hope is that long term we're able to see that whether it's CPS or a community provider, bigger share of low-income kids are enrolled across the city.
That's majority of our families.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I just have one question. I too then actually commented on the data around growth, which I think is phenomenal considering what we've been through over the past 2.5 years. So I think that that's great. The only thing I will add, it would be helpful at some point to look at those demographics so we can see where the movement and the shifts occurred, who they are, where they're coming from, the economic situation. And I like your last point, Mr. Lindy, about you shared it about looking at having brain freeze, but what he said, okay. But, data around the demographics, that would be helpful. And you can decide, timeliness of that, but sometime in early fall, maybe, would be great. Yeah.
That would be probably be better because that would be after the district actually rolls over and we have the data in the power school.
Okay. And then one other thing I'd like to know is, can you just briefly sort of walk us through the registration process for preschool? Is it different than sort of a standard enrollment?
Yes, it is.
Can you walk us through that? There may be a family member listening in who wants
So any family member can actually go online to our website and they can hit preschool or the enrollment tab, and they begin the process by filling out either the online enrollment, or if they do not have time to do the whole online enrollment, there is a tab that says interested in preschool that we monitor. It goes to a Google, so we monitor and contact those families back in like 48 hours. Once they have finished that online enrollment, our assistant school community coordinators that are out in the field contact the parent, make an appointment, because for preschool, families do have to supply more documentation because we are grant funded and funded in multiple ways. So then they set up an appointment with the family. And if family has difficulty with transportation or things like that, we find ways to assist them. So we're able to complete the enrollment. And then once that meeting occurs, the decision is made where the family would like the child to attend, and that child becomes enrolled in that school. They can always call 513-363-0017.
Thank you. Great. Okay, any other questions? Just one final comment. A couple of you may have heard me talk about my grandson who's in preschool, and he's a little bit upset right now at the end of the school year because he thinks he's supposed to go to kindergarten and not the pre-K 4. So his parents, we all talked to him about, well, you're now one of the big kids, okay? He was like, but I already know that stuff. So he does think he knows the stuff, but it's kind of funny. But he is upset that he's not going to kindergarten. We told him you'll get there one day.
Yeah, just relax and keep learning.
He loves it. He loves it. Yes. He has a girlfriend too.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. He does. He talks about it, except he doesn't want her to know that she's his girlfriend. Yeah.
That sounds more like
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. We have the 3E
We
update.
do. Yes. Hello. Hello again. Emily Maroney, college manager for the district. So I will wait till we get this slide up. Thank you so much, Rob. So a little bit of background. We can go to the next slide, please. A little bit of background on this. If you could hit it again, it's doing a phase in of the second part. If you could just hit like the thing again. There's a bottom portion missing, it seems. There it is. Thank you. I appreciate it. So Cincinnati Public Schools, of course, cultivating, developing students to be global contributing citizens. And so with that, having not only a diploma in hand, but having a pathway of choice and support along that and attainment of it. upon graduation. And so this was also written into the 2019 through 2022, ending this year, strategic plan that looked at building it from a 90 to 100% response rate over 3 years' time. And so last year, when I started in May, we had it at a response rate of 97%. And this year, the goal was, per the strategic plan, to reach 100% of all. So I phrase it as every student who walks the stage in May has a pathway that they have declared, a pathway that they're prepared to embark on. Next slide, please. So I'm looking at that, how we do this in process. I actually changed up, starting with my May start last year. I looked at how the survey was and where it could be. Where do we really know how students are attaining their intent, like where they're intending to go post our time here at CPS? And so we, of course, continued the quarterly surveys that happen, but we broadened it to explore question logic. So if you tell me you're going to employment, where are you going? And what steps are you taking? Are you participating in CTE? Are you participating in internships or work-based learning in that process? Are you aware of what it means to be employed, and asking those types of questions? The survey is self-reported, so this is student voice telling us both where they're going and also their understanding of that process. So we distributed this in that quarterly format via email, QR code, advisory sessions, as well as one-on-one sessions where we had the best response rate by having counselors and other members of the village, as I call it, sit down with the student and talk through what do these questions even mean. And then additionally, some of our class sessions. So for example, at Walnut High School, they use their English classes in order to every quarter ensure that they could have these students filling out this progressive survey. Again, as I mentioned, we follow the journey. So that is really looking at the milestone tracking. I want to know how you're getting there, and I want to hear it from your voice. And those conversations, especially those one-on-one session conversations, really open the door for students to be like, oh, FAFSA, what is that? Let me tell you what FAFSA is. It also, we put in questions like CCP. Are you interested in College Credit Plus? This is what it is. And we actually saw an uptick in our CCP participation by being able to directly connect with students who identified wanting to be connected to them. So we use that across the board for all of our pathways. In Taking the Village, this wasn't just a counselor approach, though they really took on the heavy meat, the heavy lift of that, but we also capitalized on teachers having conversations with students, college team making those phone calls and email outreach, career coordinators in buildings this year, the college access partners, so Grad Cincinnati, for example, ensuring they can sit with students and use this survey to better understand how their students are progressing, as well as MD units so that we didn't leave out the voices and experiences of our students in MD units across our district. Next slide, please. So I would like to report we got to 100% response rate. That denominator is 1818. That represents the students that walked the stage this May. There are students who are August potential graduation, students that were expelled, students that were no-shows, that every single student is accounted for and tracked, and especially with our August potential, as we call it, graduation, students that are using summer school and Ingenuity and other formats in order to be able to graduate in August. We are still looking at their intensive pathway and how we can help support in that process. So in looking at the breakdown, as in other years, we have roughly just under 70% intent on enrollment, an alternate plan, which is identified as students who are using ICANN or Children's Home as their pathway, Explore, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as employment, and then enlistment. So I will break that down in our next slide. So this year, instead of asking what they're really looking at in regards to, I'm going to enrollment, okay, cool, or I'm doing enroll and enlist, or employ and enlist, I really asked them to break it down by what we actually see as the pathways the students take. So these are the actualized number of students who are going upon these pathways. So as you'll see, those 14 students who are obtaining or on path to obtain a certificate or credential, the 19 for apprenticeship work, another one to point out, 274 that identified employment. But I took these and clustered them then under the 3 E's so that I had a better picture. So for example, under my realm with this, which is college, I wanted to look at technical trade school. I wanted to look at that gap year between high school and college that used to be called undecided. There is no such thing as undecided. It's called we're going to explore it together. So using that gap year into that percentage as well, and looking at, are you going to a 2-year or 4-year? Because we have initiatives in place to ensure you actually end up there. So those are the numbers that stand out. I also want to identify that I allowed for students, instead of saying primary pathway, and last May, getting the question of, well, I'm kind of doing 2 things, allowing them to choose a secondary. And how we defined it was by saying the primary is the one that you're focusing a lot of your eggs into that basket, but I understand some of you are planning to work as well. I'm understanding some of you are planning to do military academy while also enlist. And so giving them the opportunity and still asking those progressional marker questions at the same time. Next slide, please. So I've broken into the next 3 sheets, 3 slides, the schools. And so I just wanted to point out, because you have this data on hand, we saw some increases in enroll across the district this year. So especially at some schools that historically have presented students in the employment track or other tracks. So we actually saw a 26% increase in enrollment as intent at Houston High School. Next slide, please. And I will also identify that each high school, it has their own tracking sheet. It's a live feed, so they get to see this live time as students respond. They've been using this longitudinally throughout the year to connect with students, be more aware of where they need to offer resources, as well as have that informed conversation at the end of the year with their constituents. Some on these slides I want to point out, Euler actually had an increase of 32% of students intending to enroll this year. They actually had a high scholarship cohort as well. With that, Schroeder High School grew by 40% of students who, from last year into this year, that cohort of intending to enroll. And also on this slide, Taft grew by 15% from a year that Taft historically has been more of an employ of intent high school, and this year was a enroll high school. Next slide, please. In pointing out Riverview as well, that grew by 29% in the enrollment category from last year's data. In Western Hills, there was a 19% increase in enrollment intent from last year's data. Withrows had a 23% from last year's data in enrollment, and Woodward actually had a 42% increase from last year's data for enrollment. Next slide, please. So in looking at how we broke down these questions, I just pulled out some of our progressive milestone markers so that we could really track. So we're asking students now, so actually Tuesday of this week was the day where we got to that 100%, because the question asked, where are you going? And what scholarship do you have? Or where are you going to be employed? What career cluster are you looking into? What military branch? So I've broken this down. So I put up, and if you could hit the slide one more time, there's one part missing. I didn't realize I did a fade in. Technical trade school, which is under the enrollment umbrella. These were our top schools. We have a lot of students interested in cosmetology, culinary arts, and nursing. We additionally, by enrollment numbers, no surprise here, over 60% of our students end up going to the University of Cincinnati, as well as the UC Blue Ash campus. But I put up the top by cohort, and you'll see here we have some HBCUs represented as well, especially Tennessee State. Had a lot of our students that are going to be matriculating there this fall, along with heavy financial aid packages to support that. So with that lens of affordability to college, I asked the question blatantly to students, check all that apply. I have someone I can talk to. I am worried about how I'm going to afford my college experience. And so being able to look at that, we also were able to find a correlation that we have 67% of students that identified also working while in college, and that often when correlated to the question of financial affordability, saw a lens of not of feeling that they had to do both. But that didn't actually, when looking at those variables, align with the amount of aid they were getting. So that opened up doors with conversations in my village to be able to say to students, for example, Benyai Coleman, who is getting the Marion Spencer from Houston High School, being able to say, if you don't want to, or there's no other needs that we aren't aware of right now, you actually don't have to work part-time to do this. You have these resources afforded to you, and kind of that opening lens was really good, and she was very grateful for that conversation from her support network. We did have over 60% of students attend a college fair event this year, which is the highest that we've had in looking at our tracking data and other formats that we have in our office and suite. Next slide, please. In enlistment, I broke it down by branch. I also asked this year if there was a military academy that they would be attending. So that is by student specific. So we have 1 heading to the Air Force, 2 with the Coast Guard, 3 with the Merchant Marines, which might Dean very happy, 5 with the military academy, and 3 with the Naval Academy. Next slide, please. Under employment, the top 5 career clusters you can see as listed here. These are where students are heading to, and of that, we had 83 students identify that they were actually already employed with where they intended to be continuing employment post-graduation in their quarter 4 survey. And 62% of those, 62 students, not percent, excuse me, 62 students said, well, guess what? I'm actually doing an experience through my high school or an opportunity that relates not only to my career cluster, but my employment of intent. And so being able to really, again, look at when we're asking the questions, the awareness of that, and then getting on board with those opportunities. And then thinking about employment hours, what was interesting is a lot of students still have kind of undetermined about whether or not they were planning to work full-time or part-time. Some of that integrates into that data is, again, the students that are potentially using employment as a primary pathway, but are going to be attending part-time at college. Mm-hmm. So that has a correlation. Next slide, please. I also broke it down by race and ethnicity, and so I just wanted to point out a couple of things. There wasn't much variation happening from last year to this year with our race and ethnicity breakdown for students. Some things that did change, however, is we saw an increase in Black identifying and Hispanic identifying students in the enlistment pathway. And additionally, we saw a decrease in students who identify as a white identity in the employment pathway. Next slide, please. Gender, the gender for enrollment is actually representative of how students, the college-bound activity in our high schools. So our male participation rate for things such as College Credit Plus, which we're trying to increase that participation rate. So we do have a larger female identifying cohort that ends up being enrolled in college and college-bound. There was a shift in enlistment last year. It was a larger percentage was male identifying. That actually shifted this year and grew. Last year was 39%, and that has grown this year. And then under employment, last year we have actually grown with female identifying students choosing employment by 11% from last year's data. Next slide, please. So I'm looking where we use this data and what this means. The story does not end, the support does not end. So out of my own office, the college team, we have summer melt work, what I call the first year and beyond. So starting this April, we connected with students who identified their intent. We're closing that gap between intent and actual sitting in seats in the fall. And so there's activities that happen for our university partners over the summer, identified on this slide, and we work with regional partners. So we actually pay a stipend to counselors in our district for summer employment to connect with these cohorts, both of what our university partners are telling us, our students who are to be matriculating to them, as well as students from this 3E data, which is why we ask such explicit questions. So we have actually seen great success this past year with our summer melt by even taking UCBA, where we historically had a higher gap with matriculation of our students compared to their peer cohorts of other high schools, regionally and nationally. We actually balanced that out to be exactly at 0 this past year through our summer melt. And so using this data for that continued relationship. Additionally, I am working on reciprocal data agreements with our college partners in the region to be able to say, it's really important to know that our students matriculate. That's great. It's great to know the fall-to-fall retention and persistence that comes down to the disaggregate and not just the aggregate of systems we have on hand here at CPS. But to take it even a step further, are our students graduating and are they attaining a degree with a career? And so that is really the lens of the work that we are doing, is to say your time is not done. And I'll talk shortly about a partnership and what that means. I also use our college consortium, which meets bi-monthly, which has 34 college partners, to say, is the lens that I'm seeing correct to the lens that you're experiencing? and having those intentional and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. Next slide, please. So in the employment, Mike's team, hey Mike, working with established industry partners to continue to extend those employment offerings. So Mike's team reaches out to students post-graduation per the list and contact information that we asked them in Q4 and in Q1 to identify. So we sandwich that to say, how can we contact you post this, and who is also someone that we can contact if we can't get a hold of you, both an email, a phone number, or any other form that you would identify for us to do. So his team reaches out and has a connection with students to say, you identified employment. Where did you end up if we haven't identified that? And are you enjoying it? What is this looking like? And really navigating that lens of the employment network. One area we can grow in this across the board and is not on this slide is with military. There kind of isn't that identified military person. We kind of all take on the weight of that. So being assured, especially from my lens of military academies, to be able to ensure our students are persisting at the academy, enjoying their experience and such. And then leveraging our partnerships. So July 1st, the intended launch of our College and Career Resource Center, which is the new Grad Cincinnati partnership, we are able to use this data with Grad Cincinnati, especially for our students that identified gap year. That is a year that they are going to be connected with for the first time, a year that they get to have that conversation of how are you getting to that next step. And so we had on this Q4 survey, I asked the question of, this is what this center is. Would you like to be connected with them? And I had a 79% response rate identify from the student themselves that they would like to be connected with, to have forthcoming conversations, even if they have already identified a pathway and are progressing what we would call successfully along that. There's still what I deem to be really critical conversations that takes, again, the even larger village. So that team has been really, really great in connecting with university partners to talk about what does second through fourth semester financial aid look like and conversation points for their students from the lens that they can offer. So that is our 3E data. I will say that some lessons learned that we are planning for next year. While the strategic plan does not yet have it included with percentages and intent, we are still going to continue the work because every single student should still have someone who is a champion, a district that is a champion for where they want to be and where they envision themselves thriving. And so looking at a different platform, we use Google as a platform this year, looking at a different one because we had a big data glitch that occurred with that we would like to not happen again. The length of the survey was some feedback that we got because these questions, while critical to us supporting the student and the student knowing those steps, how it's formatted can be done a little differently, and then building into other models that currently are in our district that can answer the questions that we need to know in a more informed way.
Questions, board members?
I'll just say a couple of quick comments. Thank you so much for sharing the data. I really appreciated being able to see the graphs of each particular school and the actual intent of the students. And one other thing that I really enjoyed is the fact that you said you wanted student voice, and you're being very intentional with the questions that you were asking them. And it gets me really excited because I know so many of our students, they have so many different paths that they want to do. And I think it's really nice that we're offering this as a resource and making sure that we're fulfilling what we are planning to give them academically and post, obviously, with graduating. One question that I had is you said that you do follow up with their journey. How long is that follow-up? Is it a set time? Do you say, oh, you only have a year? Is it 2 years? What would be that?
Yeah, so this is the first year in that follow-up. So my ideal time frame, and that's where the reciprocal data agreements come, to be able to know individually the student outside the aggregate persistence rates. Mine would be to the end of their college career. And so that's where it's also leveraging the CCRC in that work. But we say to students, in fact, the end of the survey says, your journey with us is not done. We're just champions in this work together. And so also contact information in that. And we have already sent out through our summer melt work and other pathways, that outreach to those students to congratulate them on their pathway of intent, and also offer our resources, the resource that's opening on July 1st. But in the ideal world, if I can get these MOUs signed, it's to career one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Yeah. Mr. Craig, do you have any questions or comments?
I just would make the one comment that I
Can you
think.
hear me?
Can you hear
Are
me
you
now?
muted? Yes. Okay.
Okay, hopefully. So you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. I think the one comment I have is just that I think it's really important that we keep building up this conversation with the students, because I think the earlier we can have some of those conversations, the more we can track both their path to those different roles, but also the results along their path. And so I think it's great to keep those conversations going.
Great, thank you.
Yes, and then my comment, I share some of the sentiments as my board colleagues that I see lots of growth in this area, lots of growth, and I really appreciate that. It was helpful to see the pie diagrams. I like that. And happy to hear that it seems a little more balanced across the 3 E's, although we know, I mean, pretty typically when students graduate, most of them want to go to college, the idea, because it's just sort of a rite of passage kind of thing. But glad to see that there's a balance between that and enlisting and all of that. You did address the question that I have about the gap year and what happens. So I'm happy to hear that you're following up with our students, trying to see, have you made a decision? What's going to happen? And it'll be interesting to see how that data falls out at some point. My question, another question, my last question is, given that their high school experience is 4 years, is this process sort of initiated with them? When is the initial dialogue started with them about what they want to do when they graduate?
That's a great question. So the formality of the survey starts senior year, though there has been discussion about doing a truncated version starting junior year, much to the slight panic because it does take such a lift, especially our in-school units. But as far as what we call the aspiration search and choice of anything, really starts with advisory as that focus in 3rd grade, in some schools in kindergarten, of what do you enjoy doing? What do you want to be? What can you do when you grow up? But the very intentional outreach from our areas is more so starting in the 6th grade.
Great. Because I just happen to believe the earlier we begin to have those conversations, it helps kids, the students, as well as parents. There may be some opportunities for parent engagement and all that. Sometimes parents just need some direction and resources, just something to think about to help their student along, while they're sitting at home watching TV, So that's good.
Yep.
Yeah. What my last question that keeps coming up, what happens in advisory?
Sure. So advisory is a curriculum that focuses on 3 major pillars. The first being academic excellence. So thinking not only of academics as a GPA to attain, but academics as an exploration of what really brings you passion. The second part being the look at post-secondary pathway. So is it career? Is it military? Is it enrollment? Is it still explore? And that is okay. And we'll talk about it. And then the third that is really honed in on is social and emotional lens. So behavioral, the SEL aspects of how are we good stewards of ourselves and those around us. And that is built and built upon throughout their time. So this year was a pilot through the Mayerson Foundation with one of my staff to build advisory into the K through 2 network. And so we had some pilot schools with that. We have advisory at some schools 3 through 6, and then advisory 7 through 12. And so each of those segmented grade bands has a very built upon. So these lesson planners and coaches and teachers are talking and network with one another to ensure that there is progression and transition with these topics for these students. And then I will also say for next year with advisory, Penny, we're still doing it. Advisory is also integrating graduation seals with more intentionality so that 7th through 12th grade students, in fact, we're integrating the OMJ seal so that students who participate in OMJ and also have the support of that additional outside mentor through school coordination are able to get the OMJ seal by participating in the advisory curriculum.
Any other questions? Wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you doing this for us.
Yeah,
I
I
do.
love it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks. All righty. Moving right along, and we're about to lose our next board member. I know she has to go. We have the career tech.
So Mike Turner, Career and Technical Education Manager. Great to be with you here today. When I was last with you, which I think was 3 months ago, took a pretty deep dive into what all we do in career tech and all of that. So today, really going to focus on where we stand for the start of next school year, what some of our summer work will be, and then a focus on some of our data with some great achievements for this school year. So for next school year, we will actually, for the first time, be in 16 high schools in some form or another. We do have Lighthouse School that is not in that number. We are doing work with Lighthouse School, but it's not formalized in the career tech sense. We have a great collaboration going on between the Department of Student Services and Career Tech in meeting the needs of the special population at Lighthouse. So we're excited to move forward with that, but we'll be in all 16 high schools other than Lighthouse in one form or another, whether that is a full Career Tech pathway or our two that we're adding for senior only are Walnut and Spencer. A great deal of excitement at both of those schools with this. And so we're extremely pleased to have that happen. We will be in 12 career cluster areas. There are 16 that are recognized nationally. In Ohio, there's about 12 listed because Ohio combines. So we're in almost every career cluster. And then we have 21 specific pathways with 70 teachers is where we'll fall at the beginning of next school year. So just the breakdown is on the screen for what we'll be adding. At Spencer, we will be adding a senior-only Google certification credentialing program. At Walnut, we will focus on senior-only cybersecurity. Data, we are adding a pathway for supply chain logistics, which falls under the business career cluster. Gamble Montessori, we will be adding programming and software development. Schroeder will have a full pathway for the first time with medical bioscience. And then Taft will have exercise science and sports medicine. What is exciting about Data, Gamble, and Taft is thus.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I want to ask this question before I leave. How are the specific areas decided on in terms of what you're offering at the schools? Does it come from student voice?
Yes. Yes, it does. Actually, the two main criteria for adding something, first of all, is student voice, student interest. If the students are not interested, adults do not need to be sitting around a table saying, we need this, because you can build it, but if there's no interest, they're not going to come.
Right.
The second thing that we look at is the facility. Can the facility handle that? So, for example, if at Taft, if instead of exercise science and sports medicine being an area of interest, let's say it was construction, that would be extremely difficult to do at Taft because Taft is landlocked and we don't have a construction facility. And so in each one of these cases, we used Naviance to do student surveys. Naviance is our college and career planning tool. But what's exciting about Data, Gamble, and Taft is up until this coming school year, they've only had one choice. This will give them more than one choice. Schroeder overwhelmingly health. The health area was what came out there, but we are going to want to look at growing at Schroeder in the future and some of our other schools where there is limited choice.
And I have one other
Yes.
question. How do you follow up in terms of when the kids are graduating, if they have gone in those particular areas?
Yeah, so part of what we do is, and it's being moved sooner this year, typically it takes place between January and March. We follow up with all of the students who graduated in a career tech program, and we asked them, are you in college? And if so, what for? Are you working? If so, what for? And then we see, does it match their area? This year, the federal government is pushing all of that earlier, so we'll be doing it between October and December, which I like a whole lot more because you're closer to the time that they graduated. And we can share that data next year when we present, because we'll have it all once we come back.
Great.
But if you have any other questions that you see, just contact me. I'll be happy to answer them. So one of the things, next slide please, that we focus on with Career Tech is graduation. We definitely want our students to walk across the stage. So with the addition of the high school-based career coordinators for this year, to date they have worked with a little over 200 students who needed the career readiness option to graduate. They will be working with more students this summer who are going through summer school and will need that to graduate. Those are students who did not get the number, the points that they needed for the end of course tests. And so the career readiness option is their best way to graduate. What happened with these students is, for most of them, not all, but most, they did a 12-point industry credential and they did the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal that Emily referred to earlier. And if you get both of those things, they satisfy the career option, but they also give you the 2 seals that you need to graduate as well. So as long as a student has their course credits, they can graduate. So we actually have 214 as of today, and we expect that number to grow higher with some of our August graduates. The guiding work that we're going to be doing this year, I'll start with career coordinators first. These are the newly added career coordinators for this school year. They do work through the summer. They'll be reviewing the preliminary data from the 21-22 test that students took, and that's basically Algebra 1, already getting a head start with, here are our 9th graders. What do those 9th graders need to help them graduate if they don't get the points that they need between Algebra 1 and English 10. They will also be developing plans for those students. And so that's the career coordinators. Our summer guiding work for career tech teachers. Next slide, please. We have a subset of career tech teachers who are working on a curriculum crosswalk to look at what core content standards, in other words, English, math, science, and social studies, how do they intersect with the career tech standards? Believe it or not, in the world of career tech, we are held accountable to how the students do on English, math, and science state mandated testing, even though we don't teach that in career tech classrooms. And so this will be very valuable for us. They're also looking at industry credential alignment. What we want to be able to move to is, if you're in the agriculture pathway at Gamble Montessori, here's the list of industry credentials that can be introduced with each course and that students should be able to walk away with when they graduate. And then finally, what the career tech teachers will be looking at is their WebXam data. WebXam is equivalent to the algebra and English tests that the students take. They're just career tech tests. They are state and federally mandated tests. They will be doing a data review and curriculum alignment with those. And then finally, next slide, please. The career tech staff out of my department will be supporting the career coordinators in their summer work. They will also be helping with the alignment of industry credentials to the career tech pathways. And then we will also be mapping out how we can grow our internships and other work-based learning opportunities. I'll talk a little bit more about some data with internships here shortly. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we look at in our department are all the things that you see there, whether it's internships or a mock interview. All of those build those student experiences. So if they do choose, I'm going to go to college, they have a better idea about what they want to go to college for. If they choose, I'm going to work, then we want them in a job that relates to their interest as opposed to a job that is just down the street and may pay, a decent wage for them at that time. So those are all the things that we work on, but I want to highlight in the next slide some data points. So we have looked at our trend over the last 4 school years for internships. And let me explain what we're talking about with an internship. These are students who are in school, but they have a formalized agreement through the school with a business partner for them to go work some of the day or after the day is over or during the summer at that business, and it is directly related to their career tech program. There's some benefits to that because according to Ohio law, if it relates to the career tech program in which they're enrolled, there's an easing of, for example, having to get a work permit. Students don't need a work permit if they are in a career tech program and this internship is part of that program. That also allows a little more flexibility because if you're a certain age, you may only be able to work 2 hours a day. They may be able to stretch that to 3 hours a day. So there are lots of benefits with that. But what the graph shows is that if we go back to 4 school years ago, we only had in the low 20s for students who were in these formalized internships. We pretty much quadrupled that over a 4-year period. As of right now, we have 82 for this school year, but we have 8 students who will be in the state of Ohio internship for IT this summer. We were in the pilot last year. In fact, the only urban school district that was accepted into the pilot last summer. We exceeded our amount and, in fact, took some slots that other people could not fill. We ended up with 12, which was 3 above what it should have been. This year, they have opened that up as almost like pilot 2.0, and we have 8. And so when you add the 82 to the 8, we'll have 90. And we're extremely excited about those numbers, but we want them to be higher. Give Dr. Blaze a lot of credit with an idea. I won't take credit for it. It was her idea. What we're looking at doing, though, is with these numbers, how do we put a monetary value to those numbers? So if students are earning $12 an hour and it's 20 hours a week, what does that makeup look like for the individual students and the group as a whole? Part of the challenge we have to work through with that is going back to 2018-19. Wages were lower by design because the pandemic has pushed things. We know that when we work with a partner, if they're talking about paying a student $9 an hour, that's not going to work. And so we've worked with the Urban League to be able to run some students through the grant that the Urban League has. It's called Level Up. That's getting ready to wrap up. But we've had some great partners who have said, we'll pay $12, $13, $14 an hour. With the tech internship that I mentioned that the state of Ohio is doing for this summer, they reimburse the businesses up to a certain amount. And so Ohio has been phenomenal in helping us in the world of work-based learning. So we're very excited about that. Next slide shows some next steps. We are continually recruiting for open career tech teaching positions. We know there's a shortage in many areas. So anybody watching this out in public, if you're out in industry and you're interested in working in career tech, there are positions posted if you search Cincinnati Public Schools employment. We also are completing and getting ready to submit our federal Perkins plan. Career Tech is governed by the federal government as well as the Ohio Department of Education. And so that is a lengthy process. We're in the 2-year cycle for that. And so that's taken a great deal of time, but we're pleased with what we have and we're getting ready to submit that. Once we get all of our data for 21, 22, we're going to set some goals. Career Tech data is typically on a lag because it comes from the Ohio Department of Education. There's some data that we can gather on our own, but when we look at all of our technical skill attainment data and even how our students do in reading, math, and science that we're held accountable to, we get all of that from ODE. And so for whatever reason, Career Tech has lagged a little bit from the district's data. And then we're always excited to have our new and our returning Career Tech teachers, and so we're working on a training plan. We have greatly increased the amount of professional development over the last 3 years for our new teachers and our returning teachers. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Craig, do you have any questions, comments?
I do not. You hear me? I don't have any questions, Carol. I thought it was a lot of great information about our career tech work that I think it's really something we should be talking more about.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple questions. So the federal Perkins plan, we receive funding from them for this program?
Yes.
Okay. And how do we know, like, what's percentage of funding that we get from them that funds the program?
So typically, and we're on it's pretty steady, although the funding does come from the Congress, and so they end up allocating an amount. It gets filtered out to the state, and then the state filters it out to the districts. If we look at our complete career tech budget, about 40 to 50% on any given year comes from the federal government.
Okay.
And the rest of our funding for career tech specifically comes through state formula dollars that are, they've actually increased for career tech based on the new biennium budget that was unfrozen. We've been frozen for some years, but now we have to pay very close attention to if our teachers are licensed. If they're not licensed, we're going to get less money. So we work really hard for that. And then we do have a fairly small percentage, I would say about 10 to 15% of our overall budget for any career-related thing, including career tech, comes from our general fund.
Okay. Yeah, I asked that question because, you know, things at the national level and state level are fluctuating. It changes, and, you know,
it does.
We don't want it to harm us in such a way that
and they have been very, I will say that for the last several years, the federal government's been pretty kind when it comes to Perkins funding, and Ohio has been great when it comes to anything career related. The lieutenant governor in particular, this is one of his passions. And we applied for a grant back about 8 weeks ago, 2 months ago, and we actually got the grant. We applied for $87,500. We ended up getting $100,000. It specifically addresses how do we better meet the needs of students who need the career readiness option to graduate. And we do have a significant portion of students who need to.
Just one comment, then I have another question. I'm happy to see that because we know how hard the pandemic hit us. And I saw some numbers earlier on, back a while ago, where the numbers were low, and it concerned me. But I can see here where there's some escalating of the numbers. So happy to see that. Always interested in growing the career tech piece of our curriculum. So any thoughts about, can you give us a clue of how we promote the career tech options in the schools?
Yes.
How do we promote it?
So we spend a lot of time talking about that because kids are choosing in sixth grade. So that's part because that's when they choose where they're going to go for seventh grade, you know, and they stay there because it's 7 through 12. And so we have this year and this is a small pilot, but it worked, Department of Student Services, who we collaborate with a lot. When we looked at some of the schools, the K through 8s that have high English learner populations and high student with disability populations. This year we had career tech fairs at 2 of the schools. We had one at AWL and one at Roberts. Very high English learner populations in both and high student with disability. We had our career coordinators there manning their tables. They had literature. They brought different things with them. Some had students from the high schools. And we found that to be very beneficial. It's very time intensive, but the payoff then is that students are making a more informed choice. Now, those are 8th graders moving into 9th grade. Part of what we're looking at is how do we dip down to the 6th grade level when there are so many of the 6th grade levels. Back in the day, we used to have the fair. We'd have it at Sentai Center where buses would bring kids, and then that went away. We're looking at how do we do that? Is there a way we can do it in a video format to where it pipes into the classrooms? Can we have it as part of advisory where there's a video link for each one? We have actually gained a lot of promotional material in the last year. We now have career tech guides. We've got videos. We've been on billboards for the first time this year. But for me, my passion, as you know, is all about the kids. How do we get to the 6th graders and their parents in a better way for them to make an informed choice? And if they want to switch when they hit 9th grade and go to a different school, how do we facilitate that? And even to go a step further, how do we take a TAF student, for example, who really, really wants to be a firefighter? How do we keep them as a TAF student and let them go to West High for the firefighting courses? So one of the things that we are writing into our Perkins plan for this coming budget cycle is we are starting to purchase vans, career tech vans. Never done that before. Woodward has one that they got through a grant. We're looking at purchasing 2 a year as we build out to help transport students to work-based learning experiences and some of these smaller pilots to see how do we help that choice for students.
So a couple more questions about how many business partners do we have who we work with in one aspect or another, be it in just training or exposure or actual work placements?
So we have, if you count our Business Advisory Council, our Career Tech Advisory Committee, all of our individual advisory committees, and then any business that works with our students, we are over 200 in some format or another. And that would also include community agencies who may not be a for-profit business. So there are many. And part of the pandemic, and you referred to that earlier with a dip, part of our challenge with the work-based learning activities that are not internships, but are job shadowing and things like that. Part of the challenge that we have is businesses are still not up to speed. They are in a labor shortage, combined with they really don't want people coming into their business, and many of them are working remotely. Remote work has become the norm for many of our businesses that aren't factory related or manufacturing related. And so working around that has been interesting, but we have expanded the footprint to gain some others to work with, but we still want to figure out how can we do virtual job shadowing that isn't just a canned program. Most of the programs out there, you watch a video of somebody in Portland. We don't want that. We want, how do we have you interact with someone in the greater Cincinnati area? So it's new ground.
Yeah, I was just going to say the pandemic led us to doing things very differently, didn't it?
You are correct.
So we have to make that adjustment.
Right.
Thank you. I would imagine, too, that the summer school cohort of students would add to kind of the data pieces that you have. Is that correct? Were you anticipating the numbers to grow much from that?
Yes, we do, definitely for the internships. Part of our, and adding the career coordinators has been valuable, because when you drill down to the school level and you literally have hundreds of kids who may work in the summer, how do you have someone at the school level to keep track of that? We do have a program that's through Naviance. It's called Extival, where they enter their hours, their experiences, and then someone approves it. You can even have the business approve it or the community agency approve it. But it's for the first time ever this year, we have boots on the ground at the school level to be able to do that. And so we have to figure out, how do we not let anyone slip through the cracks when you literally have hundreds of kids who work during the summer.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm done asking
Okay.
questions. But
Those were good
very
questions.
Good.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
Thank
you. Thank you, Dr. Blaze. Any more questions? I believe that brings us to the hearing of the public. But any other questions, Brandon? We good?
You just had to exit
Okay.
for the message. So
Okay. No more questions. I don't have any more either. So we're at the agenda where we want to hear the public. Do we have any? Okay. No people in hearing of public. Okay. Yes, Dr. Blaze. Yes.
I just want to recognize.
Yeah, you have to go to the mic. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Blaze. I'm director over college and career, and I just wanted to acknowledge the incredible hard work that these two have done in leading their teams. We've made several new demands this year. One is that they work together and collaborate, and I think you could hear from today's presentation how much cross work has gone into it, because if you're a kid, you're not always thinking college or career. Those are departments that we put in place. The second thing I want to acknowledge is we are establishing a new metric that's formally called dollars in pockets. We're going to have t-shirts coming soon, but right now, as of today, a rough estimate is $5.5 million just for this year that these two people have led their teams in enriching the lives of our students in the pockets and bank accounts of our families. And that doesn't even count scholarships that are going to continue for subsequent years. It's just super exciting work. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that I'm very proud of our career tech. It's like when we're out in public, people still refer to it as vocational ed. And I was like, well, first of all, let's get with the times. We're talking about career tech, and what is that? Mm-hmm. And the general public doesn't know a whole lot about what CPS does. And frequently we get questions like, why don't we connect with the Oaks? Well, that could be an option, but it may be more costly to do it at the Oaks than it would be if we did it internally. So That's why. But the more we promote it, however we promote it, I think the better we are. And I think our students will decide, if they want to be employed, they will decide at some point. And I just think the earlier we get to them, the better off we'll be with them. So thank you so much. Yeah. The only other business, and the other two board members have left, but I just wanted, and this is something we don't have to have a detailed discussion about it here, but board member Weinberg had asked me about this. She didn't know whether to put it on the agenda, so she was going to raise it in other business, was about the summer scholars data. And just in conversation with the superintendent, it's my understanding that the board is looking for information about summer scholars. And we had talked about that in this committee when they presented before about asking for data. So maybe what I'll do is pull information from my board colleagues in this committee and contact you, or should it be you or Shauna, about some of the data requests that we have around that?
Well, actually, it will probably be from the superintendent. But for this body, you can probably contact Shauna if it's going to be after June.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure, because I think one of the things I saw on email today is there was an email that went out about summer scholars, and one of the board members responded with some data requests. What I'm just trying to do is make sure we don't have 7 different people sending tons of data. I know the superintendent, we've talked about that, and I know if we could figure out a way to kind of pull it all together under one umbrella, but we'll work it out.
Okay.
We'll work it out. Okay. All right. So having no other business, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank everybody.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones, this is the last meeting before the
August.
next year. Okay,
Yes.
so August.
No meeting in July.
Excellent job.